Hello all the crazy people out there, my name is Michael, I like wizards and dragons and making games, and today we are going to talk about Z-fighting, or Z-fighting, depending on where you're from. So Z-fighting, or Z-fighting, as we all know, is what happens when you take an American and a Briton and lock them in a room together and tell them that they can't come out until they agree on how to pronounce the last letter of the alphabet. Right, so I've been reminded that this video is supposed to be about game design, not linguistics. Anyway, Z-fighting, or Z-fighting, I'm going to go with the former because I am indeed an American, is what happens when you have two surfaces in 3D space and they overlap each other. So in this example, I have two blocks. If I were to, let's say, draw them a little distance apart, we can see that they are being drawn as normal. I am blowing these up to a fairly large size, by the way, just so that we can see them from farther away, which is something that I'm going to do later in the video. These are not overlapping each other, but they are parallel. They have the exact same, I believe, coordinate on the y-axis. If I were to draw them closer together so that the sides of these blocks do overlap each other, we would see, when we look at them, that the sides of these two blocks, which are overlapping each other, which have the exact same depth, depending on where I move the camera. Even if I stand still and just move the camera left, right, or look up or down, you can see that the computer is having a hard time figuring out which of these surfaces is supposed to be, like, in front of the other, because they're being drawn at the exact same depth. Even if you're not a game designer, you might have seen this playing games, even in finished games, even though this is a fairly easy problem to fix. Sometimes it does sneak in on accident. But the first time you see it, it's not exactly obvious what's going on, and I know that a lot of GameMaker 3D people see this for the first time and think, what on earth is happening here? Is my computer about to explode or something? Anyway, there's two main causes of Z-fighting, and if you dig a little bit into the math of how the GPU figures out what pixel to put on the screen, you'll find that they're both actually the same cause. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to consider them two different causes. And the first one is exactly what you see here. So you have two surfaces that are drawn parallel to each other, that are drawn coplanar to each other, and they're overlapping. And because of this, when you do depth testing in a 3D world, the GPU will take the depth value of the pixel that you're trying to draw. It will compare it to the depth value of the pixel that's currently stored in the depth buffer, courtesy of the GPU set Z-write and Z-test enable functions in GameMaker. And it will... Well, if the new pixel is closer to the camera than the old pixel, it will draw the new pixel. If the new pixel is farther away from the camera than the old pixel, it will just keep the old pixel. But if those two values are equal, you can start to get floating point precision errors falling out of your ears. This is perhaps not the most appropriate video for me to just rant about floating point issues. If you've been on the internet for any length of time, you've probably seen jokes about it, usually at the expense of JavaScript. Things like 5 divided by 3 times 3 is not equal to 5 and that kind of thing. Anyway, this comes down to floating point precision issues in your, inside your GPU, when your GPU is trying to resolve the depth of two surfaces that are right on top of each other. Floating point equality is a whole thing. Fortunately, depending on what the exact cause of your Z-fighting is in your game when you see this, there's a couple different things that you can do to deal with it. One is to, I guess you could call this the cheating answer. And instead of actually drawing your two surfaces right on top of each other, you could give one a small offset. So instead of these two boxes being drawn at exactly the same y coordinate and causing their sides to clip through and fight with each other when they get too close, when they overlap, we can offset one by a small amount, which will generally be rather imperceptible unless you're really, really close to it. In fact, that's even, you can barely see that these two surfaces are not perfectly flush. That small amount that I offset it by just now adds up to 3 pixels on my screen when I get right up close to it. And now if we were to back up and look away, we can see that we have no more fighting. This is generally the easiest way to deal with something like this. You will see Z-fighting often if you have things like tile layers in GameMaker, all being drawn at Z equals 0 or y equals 0 if you're using a y-up camera. And of course, if you have multiple tile layers being drawn at the exact same height, they will be coplanar, they will be overlapping, and they will start fighting through each other. In cases like that, you could just lift one of the tile layers a little bit off the ground, however you want them to be layered, so that they're not being drawn at exactly the same depth, and therefore they will not continue to fight through each other. And in this case, if I just draw one of the blocks a little bit more forward than the other, we can see that the fighting goes away, and it'll work on the backside too. By the way, if you were to go like up above the blocks and look at the top, you would see that the top is still fighting through. The top surfaces are still fighting with each other because those surfaces up there are still being drawn at the exact same depth. They are coplanar, but oh, okay. So I can look at it from below. You can probably guess how you would deal with that from here on out. So the second cause of Z fighting, and like I believe I said, this is actually the same cause as the first one, but the way that it probably looks is a little bit different. So I'm going to talk about it like it's separate. Is if I were to get very far away from these blocks, even though they are drawn at different depths now, we can see that if I get really far away, they're going to start fighting with each other again. And that is because we actually do not have infinite precision when it comes to the depth of objects inside the depth buffer on the GPU to figure out what the depth of every pixel is and what should be drawn in front of other things or behind them. And if you get too far away, you start to lose enough precision in that depth buffer that even if even if one surface is definitively in front of or behind another pixel, even if one surface is definitively in front of or behind another surface, the GPU, when it compares the depths, it will still not be precise enough for it to figure out what is behind or in front of the other. And as we can see, as we get closer again, as we get if I get close again, it'll stop fighting at some point because the depth buffer is it's non-linear. It's scaled in such a way so that you have more precision for surfaces that are close to you and less precision for surfaces that are far away from you. So if there's a small offset for something that's close to you like this, it'll probably be enough to be able to correctly resolve what's in front of or behind. But when you start to get farther away, again, it is you get less precision on things that are far away because of the way that the depth is scaled, and you will start to see things fighting again. And there's a couple ways that you can deal with that. You can add a larger offset. Let's make the offset 10 times bigger than it was when things are far away than when things are near. And now when we stand in front of you, we will definitely see that we have a bit of an offset like that. But when we get far away, we will be afforded much more precision. Or rather, the precision limits won't be as noticeable. And when we get far away, they will no longer fight with each other. And that should be enough so that we can have these things disappear beyond the far clipping plane before we see anything happen. Oh no, there's a little bit, but it's really small now. Speaking of clipping planes, the other way that you can deal with this is to actually shrink the distance between the clipping planes. So it's kind of natural when people first start off with like 3D and GameMaker to want to make the near clipping plane as close as possible and the far clipping plane as far away as possible. But unfortunately, that's not actually really a good idea, because if you do something like this, your clipping planes will span many orders of magnitude, and when it comes to Z fighting, or when it comes to sorting things in the depth buffer, the issues really start to manifest themselves when you have a large number of orders of magnitude between your near and your far planes. So you can see that if I do this, if I set the near plane to like 0.1 and the far plane to like 100,000, we're going to start seeing the fighting happening much closer than it was before, even though the separation between these two blocks is actually fairly large. If I were to make it smaller again like it was before, it is going to start fighting almost instantly. That doesn't look good. And having 7 orders of magnitude separation between your near and your far planes is generally not a good idea. I usually don't like to have more than like 10,000 times difference between my near and my far plane, Really, if you really are worried about Z fighting, it probably wouldn't be a terrible idea to have it even less. So let's go back to the. Actually, let's make the separation like a nice round 1. No, I'll make it 105 because that's what we were looking at before, and I want to use the same example. So if I were to shrink my far plane to 1,000 down from 10,000, I will be able to get pretty much, like the objects are going to disappear beyond the far plane before we actually see any fighting occurring like this. That's really far. Let's make that a little bigger so that I can get farther away. Alright, still no fighting. And they should start disappearing around now. Alright, great. So that's the 2 main causes of Z fighting and how to avoid it. I know I don't usually talk about the actual consequences of the near and far clipping planes that much, aside from having things that are not between them not being rendered. I suppose it bears mentioning that if you make your near plane 0, then everything will just break. And we suddenly like don't have depth being respected in the slightest. Not related to Z fighting, but I just thought I'd mention that. Anyway, I'm gonna end this off here. My name is Michael. I like wizards and dragons and making games. If you want the code for this, look for the GitHub repository down in the video description. I really didn't make any changes here, did I? Like, I only changed 1 value. Whatever, it'll be down there. I try to post about 2 game dev videos a week, 1 tutorial like this, and 1 Let's Make a Game, currently a 3D Zelda-like wizard game, so if any of that appeals to you, feel free to subscribe. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute to the channel, links to that can be found in all the usual places, and if you wanted to pledge, I would definitely appreciate it. The game I'm working on, Wizarducks, now has a page on Steam. You can go and wishlist it if you want to help us out with the Steam recommendation algorithm, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Zenjamin, VitroV, Squarecrow, Manta Ray, GameMaker, Edward Holt, and DJ Gibbles for supporting these videos. If you want to contribute to the channel, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.